love about a great haunted location isn't necessarily the ghostly phenomenon and the things that go bump in the night. The knocks, shadows, voices, and apparitions occurring in a haunted location. Those events are really intriguing, but what I really adore about a haunted location are the stories. There is always an origin story involved with a haunted location. Always some kind of story that tries to explain the knocks and visions people experience. I really love researching the history of a location, and haunted places are overflowing with tales, either fact or urban legend. And I'd love to share these stories with you. Maybe you'll find a great new haunted location to visit. If you like visiting haunted places, some of the easiest to access are public places: restaurants, hotels, stores, parks, and museums. Often you just need to pay admission, and you're free to wander about the place looking for ghostly sights and sounds. Today, I'll be taking you to a public museum in the town of Bend, Oregon. If you happen to be in Central Oregon and want to check out a local haunt, I encourage you to visit the Deschutes Historical Museum. The Deschutes Historical Museum was previously known as the Reed School, and it is over 100 years old. The Reed School opened its doors in 1914 to teach 241 students from the first grade through the 8th grade. It was named for Ruth Reed, who had been a teacher and principal in Bend. She had retired in 1910, and they named the school in her honor. The building was built from locally quarried pink volcanic tuff. However, over time, the original pink hue of the building had weathered to a light brown color. The Reed School was designed to be a very modern building for its time. It had a central heating system, indoor plumbing, built-in electric clocks, drinking fountains, an external fire escape, and had 10 classrooms with an auditorium. The Reed School functioned as part of the Bend School District until 1979, when it stopped being a school and transitioned to become the Deschutes Historical Museum. Many volunteers and visitors have reported hearing footsteps and doors closing by themselves. The most well-known ghost at this location is George. George is said to have been a building contractor who fell to his death during the construction of the school. Vanessa Ivy, the museum manager, told the Broadside Online website, quote, "George is not a bad ghost. He helps us find stuff. Research is often conducted at the museum, and sometimes after a researcher has exhausted all possibilities searching for a specific piece of information, the article mysteriously turns up out of the blue. The piece of the puzzle we were looking for, that's what we call a George moment." End quote. If someone loses something in the museum, they only need to call out to George to help them find it, and he will lead the person to their missing item. Vanessa Ivy also told Broadside, quote, "The only sighting today has been by a museum guest. A gentleman playing piano in the museum turned to an employee and asked who the man was sitting across from her. The employee was perplexed by the question because she and the pianist were the only two people in the room at the time. When the gentleman was leaving the museum later that day, he looked up at the wall and said, 'That's the man I saw,' pointing to the photograph of George Brosterhouse." End quote. Kelly Cannon Miller, executive director of the museum, said she was in the building on a windy night and was convinced she heard someone call her name. Another source describes a second ghost that haunts the museum. This is a ghost of a young girl named Margie. She appeared to be about 6 or 7 years old and seemed to be dressed in clothing from the early 1900s. The source wrote, quote, "She earned her name from a late-night recording by a museum intern that included a cryptic voice repeating the name Margie. She's been heard giggling, turning water taps on and off, and flushing the ladies' restroom toilets." When I'm investigating a haunted location, it's really important to me to validate any stories associated with the building and the haunting. This is the part that's truly the most fascinating to me. Did the origin story of the ghostly phenomenon actually occur? In the case of George, this story is true. George Brosterhouse was an actual, identifiable person. Ed and George Brosterhouse moved to Bend in 1903 and had successful careers as building contractors. Together, they built the first city jail, St. Francis Church, the Old Bend High School, and the Reed School, just to name a few. The story of George is described in many articles about the haunted building. To quote one article, quote, "On Saturday, June 3rd, 1914, George was on the roof overseeing the delivery of some materials when he fell through the gaping hole of a staircase under construction." End quote. So did this event actually happen? Well, George Brosterhouse did die in 1914 when the Reed School opened, and his grave is located in Pilot Butte Cemetery. I also searched newspapers for this time period and found multiple records of his falling death. In one such case, carpenter at Bend is killed by fall. George Brosterhouse was pioneer builder and with a brother had a contract for new schoolhouse. Leaves family. Bend, Oregon, June 1st. George Brosterhouse, local carpenter and contractor, was killed instantly this morning when he fell 40 feet from the roof of the Reed Schoolhouse to the ground floor. With a brother, Mr. Brosterhouse had the contract for the erection of the new school building, and they were doing the carpenter work themselves. Mr. Brosterhouse was one of the earliest settlers in this locality and put up many of the buildings of the town. He was about 47 years old and leaves a wife and 2 children who are pupils in the grammar school. The only discrepancy I found is that the newspapers report his death on June 1st rather than the current day reporting of June 3rd. Also, in an interview, the executive director did say that when George fell, he was alone and was discovered many hours later at the base of where the stairs would be built. However, all the actual articles state he was killed instantly. Usually you need witnesses to be able to make that assertion, and one usually doesn't take a delivery of building supplies alone. The supplier would be there making the delivery. So I'm inclined to believe that this was an elaboration developed over time that wasn't actually fact. On to the next ghost. Margie. The ghost of Margie is undetermined, as I've only seen one reference to her in all the research I've done on this place. I haven't discovered any other death records associated with the school, and the evidence of her manifestation is the EVPs captured by one volunteer. But maybe you can visit and see if you find further evidence of Margie. I adore museums, so I took my family there for a visit one afternoon. The building is gorgeous and is obviously very well cared for. The energy in the building is welcoming and warm. The volunteer staff are extremely helpful and friendly. The research room is open for the public to use. There are 6 exhibit rooms displaying artifacts from the history of Bend, everything from pianos, clothing, quilts, the logging industry, hospital and pharmacy artifacts, baseball uniforms, and even a car. Yes, a 1907 car. I didn't experience any mysterious phenomenon, but did find the displays really fascinating. I highly recommend visiting, not just for a ghost hunt, but to view all of the amazing artifacts. I plan on visiting again by myself with a digital voice recorder to see if I pick up any EVPs, but when you're visiting a museum with kids, there is a lot of noise pollution. If you're in the mood to visit an amazing building to look for ghosts, the Deschutes Historical Museum is located at 129 Northwest Idaho Avenue, Bend, Oregon, 97703. It's open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Admission is $5 for those 18 and over, and free for those under 18. So it's a great place to bring the family for an immersion into life in early Bend. Make sure to bring your camera to take pictures, maybe record some video and a digital voice recorder, and maybe you'll make the acquaintance of George or Margie. In October, Deschutes Historical Museum also hosts an annual Historical Haunts of Downtown Bend tour, otherwise known as the Haunt Walk. Thank you for taking the time to hear about this fascinating haunted building in Bend, Oregon. If you enjoy videos about haunted locations or mysteries of the Pacific Northwest, make sure to subscribe and select the notification bell to be emailed when the next video posts.